Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program 2. In today's episode we are going to go even farther than we did before, and we are going to turn our sights on Jool. Now I've never been to Jool in any of my career playthroughs, so this is very exciting for me, and I'm very excited to experience it for the first time with the KSP2 soundtrack. So let's go to Mission Control and go ahead and grab our mission. We also have a bunch of science to spend, 2,000 points, so we're going to go ahead and unlock some things that will help us in our journey today. Part of that is going to be xenon propulsion, because that is very efficient for probes. We're going to start off by sending a probe there. We're also going to pick up this module launchers for the heavy rocketry aspect, and that unlocks the tier 3 node of science. We're also going to get these tiny decouplers, so that way we can have a little bit better looking probes. And now with that all done, it is time to build our craft in the VAB. We're going to kind of go quickly through this. It's very similar to a lot of probes that I build. This probe, however, is not going to be doing any science. This is purely exploration. So we're not going to load any science experiments on it. We'll be doing science there soon enough. So now we load it up with some xenon fuel, and the rest of it is going to be electricity. That's how these types of engines run. So that's why we have so many batteries, is that's essentially its fuel as well. So I'm looking to see what the most efficient solar panels are, and these are pretty good. However, I might want to enter an atmosphere or two, so we're going to grab the ones that retract. And of course, we're going to need some communication dishes on this, because after all, this is an unmanned probe that will be sent deep into the reaches of space. So first, we need to make sure that we have communication large enough. We need 86 gigameters, and thankfully that is the exact size of the satellite dish that we're using here. So that works out. I think that was planned. Thankfully, we had unlocked the right node in time. Go ahead and throw that on there. That will cover our communication needs. So now there's not really much else left to do for this probe. It's got 13,799 delta V as is. See, I play around with throwing Science Junior on there, but that loses almost 11,000 delta V to do that, so we're just going to take that off instead. We're going to throw a reaction wheel in here for better control. I'm going to put a couple lights on it, but they don't really matter, because I don't think I turned them on during this mission, so that's okay. They're fairly cheap. I think about throwing extra batteries on, but I'm not sure that I need them. I also play around with the idea of putting some monopropellant on here for better control, but I don't have any room for RCS thrusters, so we're going to take that off. I think the reaction wheel should be more than enough to do it. So now, an ideal altitude above Jool in order to scan is 170 kilometers, so we're just going to keep that in mind. I'm not sure that we're going to try to do any scanning in this mission, but maybe later, maybe for one of the moons of Jool, since obviously we can't land on Jool. There's not too much of a use of having a map of its surface, but one of the other moons maybe. Alright, so we got that all loaded up in a fairing, and now we're going to make the interplanetary stage, as well as the lifting stage. It's going to be an SSTO. This is the entirety of the rocket, and as you see, we have plenty of delta V to make our way into orbit with a little bit left over. We do need to put on some fin stabilizers to make sure our center of lift is well below our center of mass. And yeah, this is it. This is the rocket. We don't have enough fuel to get to Jool, as they say, but I think we might be able to work it out by adding more fuel to the xenon stage. However, I will find in our travels that we have more than enough delta V to do everything that we want to do and more. So this is just kind of irrelevant, but I didn't know at the time, so it's all important. And unfortunately, there is no testing aspect to KSP2. There's no mod for a test flight like crash. Had a little problem with my fairing there. Didn't want to put the point to it, so I decided to just rebuild it. And just, you know, try again. Yeah, make a nice soft curve rounded edge this time, not as pointy. And we're gonna change our colors of this rocket. I'm gonna choose more Julian colors, such as dark greens for the deep storms and light greens for the atmosphere. That's the accent. And there we go. Might be doing some color scheme changes to each of the rockets. And as you see there, that color scheme change gave us the 2000 Delta V we needed. So now we can make it to Jool. So the sun rises on another glorious day on Kerbin. And unfortunately, we no longer have a countdown to our launch because this is post-update. So we will take off right away. The score syncs up. We have liftoff. I was worried that within the update it removed the cloud system. However, we made another launch later. And as you can see there off in the distance, there are actually clouds still in the game. But when I was recording this footage, I was very worried that there were no more clouds because of this clear launch day. But anyways, we're easily coming up through the atmosphere. In fact, we're starting to build up a little heat. So the best thing to do when that happens is to lower your thrust. Make sure you're still above 1, of course, but lower your throttle so you're not pushing as fast through the atmosphere, and that'll help manage your heat. So now we pass 100 kilometers of apoapsis, so we can go ahead and kill our engines once we get to 120. There you go. We're going to go ahead and cut ahead to the actual circularization burn. We are now in space, so we can jettison our fairings. We could have jettisoned our fairings earlier, save some of the weight. However, I like to just play it safe and get rid of them once we're in space. We deploy the solar panels, and we have to deploy the communication device at another time. So let's go ahead and circularize. Once again, I mentioned this is an SSTO. That is a single stage to orbit. So it'll take us no time at all to circularize using this engine and the amount of fuel we have. It's very efficient for small probes like this. So I'm very happy to see it perform so well because we're going to be putting it to the test soon enough. This is the mainsail engine, if I remember correctly. Okay, so now it is time to get ourselves out to Jool. We are going to wait until we have the appropriate transfer window, and we're just going to go ahead and fast forward to our transfer because we have a lot to do today. As you probably can tell from the name of the episode, we will be tooling around the system and seeing how many moons we can visit before we have to end the episode. So I'm very excited to show that. We get to hear a couple different soundtracks, and yeah, we get to break the boundaries of anything that I've ever done before, so very exciting. So let's go ahead and time warp out until we are now in the sphere of influence of the sun, Kerbal. Like I said, we're going to be skipping forward a little bit. As you can see, we only have 143 Delta V left in our lower stage. So we're going to burn off that very quickly in our next maneuver, and then it will be up to our xenon engines to carry us the rest of the way. I do have this very annoying sound of the electrics depleting in our Duna rover. And unfortunately, that will plague us for the rest of the mission. And but I do figure out how to lessen the sound of it in the next episode. So, but I'll try to keep it from being too up front when it happens. Very happy with this color scheme. I think it turned out pretty well. I wasn't sure when I was finalizing it. I'm like, it could look a little bile-y, but I think it came out right. So yeah, all that was the rest of the fuel from the lower stage, and now we are burning on the upper stage, and it is a xenon engine, which is very efficient, but very slow. As you can see here, we have a 5-hour burn ahead of us. Thankfully, with the magic of time warping, physics warping, and a little bit of editing, we're going to go ahead and bring it to the actual intersection burn here. So we've already planned it out. We've gotten close, and now we're just fine-tuning our burn to come into the sphere of influence of Jool. And we'll be there soon enough. So I use K2D2 to handle the burns because I need some way of automatically turning it off as we time warp our way through the many hours of burn instead of, just letting it go and having to leave my computer running for 5 hours. We can just time warp our way to the end. But of course, we need to make sure that we don't overshoot our mark, and that's where K2D2 comes in. Unfortunately, it's not the most accurate, so sometimes you don't line up exactly with your maneuvers, but in this instance, close enough is good enough. So here we are. We will now intersect Jool, and we can make our capture burn somewhere around there and start playing around in his backyard. We have 17,700 Delta V to work with, so I think we're going to be able to do quite a bit. The Xenon engine, however, does not have a lot of thrust, so in certain situations it will not be the best engine for the job, but it will be what we have, and eventually we'll send Kerbals here and do a better job of checking out different places. Yeah, that little notification thing is killing me. I don't know how to change it, but it's just because we're time warping and the rover is running out. But here we are in Jool Sphere of Influence. The Kerbal at Mission Control sounded very annoyed and upset, and I realized it had taken us 12 years to get here, so, it's been a long time coming to be sitting in there in the control room. But yeah, the Jool soundtrack was very interesting, very much reminiscent of a fantasy game, kind of the light fluty bits. There's a harp, I believe, a little bit of accordion, and unfortunately most of it is heard in the map view. It doesn't exactly plan out the way that the rest of the soundtracks have, as far as getting close to the surface and trying to land and all that stuff. It was more present in the high atmosphere of Jool, and so I think because the game expects you to be in high atmosphere more, they want you to experience it more there. But here we are, getting a nice capture burn through our interception with Tylo. We're going to make a little flyby of Tylo, and that's going to slow us down considerably. So we're going to go ahead and take that maneuver. I'm going to plot it in to K2D2, and once again we're going to have to time warp our way through it. Thankfully, the reaction wheel that we added to this is powerful enough to flip this craft around really easily and quickly. I was glad to do it. The reaction wheel is one of those things that I learned early on. I had missions where I could have benefited from having a reaction wheel and I didn't, and so that's been my go-to, make sure you never forget on your craft. So we're coming into the maneuver. We're going to keep an eye on the map view because we can see what's going on a lot better this way. So that's, again, another reason why I said most of the soundtrack we're going to be hearing in the map view. So we're going to go ahead and skip forward a little bit. Our maneuver wasn't perfect. It did not align up correctly the way that we had plotted it. However, we still do have a Tylo encounter, so we're going to plot in another maneuver, just a little adjustment there to try to get the same capture that we had before. And it's going to take a bit of playing around in this episode. A lot of it is just figuring out how flybys work. So I skipped ahead. We are burning now. We're actually about to finish up. And just to quickly see our orbit change. And there you go. And once again, it does not fully complete the maneuver that we wanted it to, but it does good enough. I think K2D2 has a little ways to go before it's as functional as MechJeb. Hopefully the mod authors don't abandon it completely, because I think it's a crucial part of the KSP2 experience. So let's go ahead and time warp our way to the sphere of influence change. And luckily, each of these moons seem to have a little bit different of a soundtrack as well, so we're going to be able to experience the Tylo soundtrack. It's very nice, very ethereal. And we're going to come visit Tylo again in a later episode, because this is part of the main story. And so we'll be back. But for now, let's just visit it, introduce ourselves, and then move on to our next part of our journey. Like I mentioned, I'm going to try to turn down that sound when it happens, when it's so aggressive like that. Unfortunately, it also included part of the soundtrack. But I learned in the next set of recordings how to adjust the volume of notifications and UI things and all that to really focus on what we want to focus on. Alright, so now we have a periapsis of, or I should say an apoapsis technically, of 117 kilometers, so that should be safe enough. We shouldn't smack into any mountain ranges, hopefully. So now we're plotting in another maneuver. We're going to do it before we leave the sphere of influence and use Tylo's gravity to assist us. We're going to try to lower our periapsis once again and see which other moon we can intercept with. So there we go. We have an intercept with Val. It's a very short one, but it will do. It only costs us 1,500 delta V, and we still have 17,500. So, be good. Very efficient little probe for this mission. I unfortunately do not get the chance to do a Jool 5. I would have loved to, but that is a more complex mission, and something that we may work on later down the road, maybe in another series, because in another series we will have career funds and it may be a mission, so we may save it for that. If you're not familiar with what the Jool 5 is it's to fly by and land on each one of the moons and return. I don't know if returning is a part of it, but I think it is. But you're supposed to land on every single moon of Jool. We can fly by. We possibly could have flown by all the moons, but by the time we were done recording, we had been doing this for several hours, and it was hard enough to get the intercepts that we got, and the last two moons were proving a little bit impossible with what we had available. So we only visit 3, but we do visit 3 out of them, so I'm pretty happy with that.
And like I mentioned before, this is not our last time at Jool, so I'm in no rush to complete that. And again, we have no science on board, so there's not really even a necessity for such a mission. Today we're just tooling around Jool and seeing what we can see, hearing what we can hear. And so we pass our periapsis. We are going to be sailing away. We plotted our maneuver in K2D2 and let it time warp our way to that point. Get a nice little view of Jool from a distance. We're going to be seeing it much closer up soon enough. And once more, just effortless electronic burn of the ion engine. We're going to time warp our way through it. We are now once again in Jool's sphere of influence because it had taken us that long to do the maneuver. We successfully completed the better signal mission since we are now in a stable orbit around Jool. Before we were just in a flyby of Tylo, and it wasn't until we did this maneuver that we actually succeeded. And as the maneuver completes, it gives us our flyby of Val. And as we focus in on Val, we have a nice high flyby. We don't want to get too low because we don't know what the safe minimal altitude for any of these moons are. So pretty happy with that. We're going to go ahead and just time warp our way to the intercept. Focus back on our craft. It's like I mentioned before, like we end up spending a lot of time in the map view because it's just so much easier with this ion engine to really see what you're doing. And I go ahead and approach the maneuver. Once again, listening to the ominous pulls of the strings. I would say I would rate this third so far of all the soundtracks that we've heard. It's very nice, but I feel like it was missing a little something, and having come from Duna, it's hard to top that soundtrack. But Jool is trying. Just a nice, smooth flyby. Getting a nice closer view of the storms on Jool. Looking very much like Jupiter. Just green. Gorgeous. We can see Lathe there in the background. And then suddenly I find myself whirling past Val. Somehow I had time warped straight through our encounter, completely overriding the soundtrack. So didn't get to hear basically anything. We can hear a little bit right now as we're in the end. And it seems very cool, very ethereal, but it's only going to fade out as we approach our exit. Thankfully, we didn't change our orbital trajectory very much, so we're still in orbit of Jool. We're not in danger of flying out, but I didn't like the fact that we didn't get to hear the soundtrack. I didn't like the fact that we didn't really get to see the moon in any way, so we're going to go ahead and set ourselves up for another rendezvous. This current maneuver will also give us a rendezvous of Lathe, but it's Val we want to return to. Yep, and there we go. Once again, back in Jool's sphere of influence. So back to the Jool soundtrack. There's Lathe over there. Lathe is the planet with an the moon with an atmosphere and an ocean. Very cool. Might want to make a plane and send that down to Lathe. I think that'd be kind of fun. We can fly through the atmosphere and find a nice place to land. Take a shot for posterity. I think that'd be pretty cool. But for now, let's just focus on getting this probe around. Time warping through our maneuver. And thankfully this time we did not run out of any kind of electrical charge, so we didn't have that extremely annoying pounding sound. So there we go. We have our Val encounter. Once again, periapsis that's relatively high above the surface, but low enough that we should spend enough time in its sphere of influence that we can hear stuff. By the way, I've been taking a look at some of the other mods for KSP2, and I'm actually very excited to continue this. We are almost done with the story mode of KSP2, and once we finish that, we may think about moving on to another season, and this season we would be doing career mode. I'm pretty excited about that. There's some changes to the gameplay that will happen when we do it that way, so looking forward to it. But of course, I also don't want to rush the end of the story too much, because I don't feel that I have quite completed what I need to do. Alright, so now we are once again in the sphere of influence of Val. This time we're gonna take our time to pass by. Shiny grayish green ball, looking a little bit like Min-Mist, but just rougher around the edges. Very cool. We get to see Jool pop up once again in the background. Jool is like that photobombing friend that's always appearing in your photos. Right in the background, smiling face. Don't worry, Jool. We'll make you the center of the attention soon enough. Alright, so now we've flown by Val, and it had a bit of a soundtrack. It was nice, but I think we're not going to really experience anything unless we land on it. So now I spend a lot of time trying to get an encounter with another planet. We get another Tylo encounter that sends us real far out, which we don't want. We don't want to do that. We're going to try to focus on some of the inner stuff. But I would like to visit some of these outer planets as well, or moons. This Julian system is really messing me up because I keep wanting to say mun instead of moons, but these are actual moons, not the mun, and keep saying planets instead of moons. It's just it's throwing me off. never been here before, and I feel out of my element. So now I'm going to spend more time than I wish on trying to get an encounter with those moons that are farther out. However, not paying attention to the fact that they are on a completely different plane than the rest of the moons. But here we find ourselves with a lathe encounter. I'm kind of curious about that. It's going to send our orbit out fairly far, but if we can just adjust it a little bit, we can get a better encounter and hopefully lower ourselves like so. I don't know why I didn't take that encounter. Honestly, after looking back at the footage, I'm like, that would have been a much better one than we ended up taking, but yeah. Regardless, we're going to play around with our orbit once more. We're going to try to set our target for these outer planets. Oh, that's why I didn't take it. It's because I was still trying to get to Bop and, what's the other one? That other one out there. Pole. Bop and Pole. But both of those are significantly inclined to where we are at already and the rest of the moon. So I think that will have to be a time for another, or that will have to be a maneuver for another time. We'll fly by lathe, check that out, and then we'll figure out what to end with, because by this point I'd already been recording for like 3 hours, and I was getting ready to wrap it up. So rather than spending another extra hour trying to get every flyby of all the Jool's moons, we are just going to fly by lathe and then say goodnight to our lander, or to our probe, and call this episode. But we will be back. Let's go ahead and plot that into K2D2 and let it do its thing. Even the tape rewinding and fast forwarding sounds of time warping, I was able to minimize that as well, so it's a little less intrusive to the overall atmosphere of the game. And that Kerbal stalking. I enjoyed it. It's very fun. It's a nice addition, but I feel it should be toggleable. And after a certain point, it kind of gets a little old. So let's go ahead and skip forward to the end of that maneuver. And we have ourselves a lathe impact just come to lathe and stop. But I don't really feel like adjusting it just yet, so we're going to time warp our way to the other side of Jool until we get a little bit closer. We can see lathe right there ahead of us, orbiting Jool, and we are going to be intercepting it soon. And looking around for the moon once again. There we are. And we enter its sphere of influence very quickly. I was hoping we could get a better view of it when we did. Unfortunately, we didn't. So now we have to focus on keeping our craft from slamming into the surface, because as fun as it would be to land on lathe and see it for the first time, that is not what this probe its destiny is meant for. So we are going to burn radial out to make sure that we lift high enough to avoid lathe's atmosphere. And there we go. Now we have an escape. And that will do. That will keep us from impacting the surface as long as we can complete the burn in time because it is an hour-long burn after all, and we are going to be approaching our periapsis in an hour. So we'll see how this does. And we're 20 seconds away from our burn, and the time warp automatically adjusts to stop. And we're going to burn in 3, 2, 1. There we go. So let's time warp our way. Let's get into cinematic mode and say hello to the moon that is Lathe. I turned down the volume. Unfortunately, we can't hear the soundtrack because the sounds of our battery running out is just too mighty. But look at that. Gorgeous. Thankfully, our tiny amount of thrust was enough to avoid the atmosphere. And even though we are still burning even past our periapsis, it's just the fact of an ion engine. It's not meant to handle such aggressive maneuvers. But we don't need to do anything else with it, so we can go ahead and turn that off. And we have a nice low periapsis of Jool, which is going to be good because we're going to try to bring ourselves in and see what this atmosphere is all about. Unfortunately, it seems to be harder to do that than I had initially anticipated. It requires a lot of delta V and to go very far out in order to lower my periapsis again. It's not just a matter of circularizing around it, apparently. So we're going to leave Jool's, or Lay's sphere of influence, and then we're going to focus on landing on Jool. Yeah, I'd love to take a plane and fly from a couple of these different continents or islands. Look around, see what there is to see. I think they should have put the monument on Lathe instead of Tylo. I feel like that would have been a little more fun. So yeah, it didn't seem like Lathe really had much of a soundtrack. And Gene Kerman once again being very frustrated at the length of time he's had to spend in that chair, and is ready for this probe to be decommissioned in style. So we're going to try to lower our orbit as best we can. We still have 17,000 delta V. Like, we could do so much with this probe. We could actually just leave Jool's sphere of influence, go on to Eve, go on to anywhere else that we want to go to, because this probe can handle it. But nope, we're gonna get rid of it. It has done us well, and it's time to say goodnight. So let's go ahead and time warp our way around to the maneuver and get ourselves ready for the descent. I'm going to plot it into K2D2, let that handle. Go into cinematic mode and watch it go. Onto the dark side of the planet. See, this one's the planet. I got that one right. And the engine ignites. I'll go ahead and time warp our way. And now the engine cuts out because we have no solar contact. The entire time before, we were able to still fire our engine even if we ran out of electrical charge because of our solar panels were still working well enough. But on the dark side of Jool, there was nothing we can do. So we had to get rid of our maneuver and replot it out so we I just went ahead and skipped ahead until we got that handled, because it did take quite a bit to find a time where we could land where we wanted to land. So with our maneuver plotted, there's nothing left to do except enjoy the descent. I made sure that we landed in the sunlight, so that way we can see as far as we can see. Because after all, this is a gaseous giant, and the pressure of which will destroy the graft. We are not going to put any cheats on. I don't think there are any cheats that can ignore the heat damage and the pressure damage of Jool. I may be wrong about that. I didn't actually look into it, but so yeah, so unfortunately we can't go the entire way down, but we'll get to see this craft survive as long as it can. So I was glad for getting the retractable solar panels. I think that was a smart move. I wasn't initially planning on landing in Jool, but I figured if we had to do any kind of aero braking, maybe on lathe or something, it would be good. So let's bring ourselves closer to the gaseous green giant. And descend into the storms. Suddenly, as I hit the atmosphere, my craft is spaghettified and I lose the communication satellite. We get this very interesting and eerie sound surrounding us. No, not that sound. Time warping as fast as we can, which isn't very fast. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up the footage, skip ahead until we're a little bit closer. The fantasy soundtrack turned quite eerie once you get close enough to Jool. I may have survived a little bit longer than I will eventually do if I had come down at more shallow of an angle. I might have to try that again. Might have to send another probe to its death, but at a better angle, because I'm fairly ballistic here. I'm coming straight down on it, so I'm picking up as much heat as I possibly can. But if we come in a little bit smarter, we may be able to get lower. That'll be a goal for next time. I believe there actually is a mission to enter Jool's atmosphere, collect some science, and then bring it back, so we shall see. We take a look below us once more. Clouds look a little bit like dunes. But we're going to go ahead and skip forward in the footage once more until we're a little bit closer. And we descend lower and lower into the clouds. Unfortunately, we quickly build up too much heat and everything explodes, and we never quite make it below the cloud surface. But that's okay. It'll be a mission for another time. We are also going to be doing that in KXP with the volumetric clouds and parallax and all that fun stuff. But that will be a mission for another time. Real fast before I end today's episode, I just wanted to point out, the eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that I now have a join button at the bottom of this video. top of the page, I have opened up a channel membership, and you can see all the benefits that we have there, but it's going to be primarily a lot of uncut footage, early access of all the KSP missions, KXP, RP1, KSP2. There's going to be some Planet Crafter stuff on there. A lot of stuff that I am working on currently, as well as some secret projects that you can only find if you unlock the membership. So please consider joining us and supporting the channel. Obviously, there's no obligations. Simply watching the video is support enough, and I can't thank you enough for it. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more KSP2. If you did, please consider giving me a like, drop me a comment, let me know your thoughts, and I will see y'all in the next one. Take care.